What's going on? Bill Guy here. Today we are going to be discussing how to be a good lead software engineer. And as the main focus of a lead software engineer is often to introduce and mentor and teach other software engineers and junior developers in their teams, I think it's really important that we go through the most effective ways of teaching things. This video was inspired by another video that I did that received a lot of really good feedback and also a lot of criticism at how dumbed down that I made it and how, I guess, bad that the some parts of the code that was being displayed actually was. So I want to address some of those points individually, and then I kind of want to give my experience as someone who has a fair amount of years of teaching people in industry on the job from day one, where you really only have maybe 2 to 3 weeks at the most to get them fully up to speed to become independent engineers and developers themselves. So without further ado, let's get straight into that. The number one most brought up point seems to be that I used IDs where normally IDs would be extremely inappropriate to use. For those of you who are unaware, I will quickly explain the not so nuanced differences between IDs and classes, and I guess when you should use different kinds of elements on the page. So the first thing that we should probably know about HTML as a markup language is that it tries to be quite descriptive and verbose. So this is even more true with HTML5, where we have things like article, aside, and basically descriptors of what the content is contained within. So the reason that a lot of people rightly so pointed out that IDs were inappropriate in this scenario is that the kind of concept behind an ID is that it represents a single element or object on the page within the DOM. This leads to some not so immediately obvious problems to the beginner developer, but to the seasoned veteran of HTML, CSS, and pretty much any programming at all, is completely smack bang obvious in the face. And I'll get to why I didn't exactly care nor cover this in this tutorial, in the tutorial later on. But essentially, the difference between an ID and a class is an ID represents an element on the page, a single object that can be found in DOM, looked up by its ID, and so on and so forth, whereas a class represents an idea or an abstract concept, or in CSS's case more specifically, a class represents a set of rules that can be applied to multiple objects on the page, giving them a style or rule set to follow on the page to be rendered. The number one most problematic thing about this is it provides you with zero reusability within your CSS, and especially if you're working across teams, but even if you're not working across teams, you want to be able to write the least amount of code possible with the most amount of effective output. So if you have to copy and paste your CSS rules for each and every element on the page, it's not a very efficient nor effective way of doing things. But the reason that I didn't actually care at all, as I was not covering IDs or classes or divs or any of those sorts of things within my HTML. Now, people have pointed out that I should just always follow best practice to begin with. However, you'll find very quickly if you're a lead engineer or you have to teach other people things in industry or even over the internet that if you add way too many things into a single tutorial or into a single lesson, you'll have someone who has more questions than answers at the end of every single session. So in the case of my Flexbox video, the entire focus was on getting someone to a point where they understand and conceptualize Flexbox. I didn't even actually cover, and I find this strange that no one actually pointed out that I didn't even cover Flexbox that much. I just covered the concept of Flexbox and some things that you can do with it and some orientations in which you can use it in. But I guess more to the point is anything or any criticisms should be directed heavily at my usage of Flexbox, which I will happily take. And in fact, I'll happily take all criticisms. But if you want to be a good teacher, you have to understand that you have to teach only one thing at a time. If you're trying to teach 2 things at a time or 3 things at a time, most of the ideas in which you're teaching will simply just be lost on the person in which you're teaching them to. The next point that was brought up was why I didn't do the tutorial originally in Sass. And although I mentioned in the original video, that I never do a project without Sass, I want to address this point from a fairly objective standpoint. And my standpoint on this is that why should I do it in Sass? Why not less? Why not do it in pretty much any sort of toolkit out there, right? So I wasn't actually going and teaching Sass or less. And for those of you who don't know already, this tutorial was aimed and done for a friend of mine who I'm trying to get up to a professional standard. Now, obviously, this isn't even anywhere close to a professional standard of development. And I too would reject all of this code if it was presented to me on my desk on a Monday morning. The point was that I didn't have a need to use Sass. And for those of you who don't know what Sass is a CSS preprocessor, and it basically adds certain static language and extensions to CSS. It makes CSS development really nice and really effective, and you can actually prefix and you can do a whole bunch of really awesome stuff. And I'm not bashing Sass. In fact, I think Sass is truly awesome. But how do I even go ahead and decide which one I should use, right? Because some of you will heavily make a case towards Sass, some of you will make a case towards SCSS, and some of you will make a case towards less, right? And how do I choose which one to use? And some of you say, well, just pick one, right? But then other people will be just as upset about that. So it's best to always do these kinds of lessons, especially let's say you're doing in-house training. It's just best to do them in vanilla sorts of CSS. And that way you can actually drive the point home. It's then really effective if you want to later. You can say, basically you take this concept, right, and you say, all right, well, in my workplace, we use Sass. So we chose Sass because the lead development team did a whole bunch of research that our junior devs didn't really do, and probably don't have the experience to do. And we basically made a technical determination that Sass was probably the best for us and for our needs. So we went ahead and chose Sass. So all we need to tell the junior developers to get an effective work output from them is we use Sass, this is how you use Sass, and this is what we just taught you, so you can take this code, no problem, and put it into the Sass environment, and we kind of build on top of things. There's an idea of, kind of playing Jenga, right? So you can really make a stable foundation, and you can really build on top of a junior developer's, knowledge and understanding of the topics, or you can just pile everything on top with a pretty much no base whatsoever, and at any second, the entire thing will fall over. And I was very guilty of doing that in my early days of teaching people. I would just kind of pile everything on top, and literally nothing would end up happening, and I would get humongous amounts of code check-ins through Git and whatever else, and I would have to reject all of them. But I always thought that was on the junior developer, when realistically that was on me as the teacher for teaching some really, really bad habits to begin with. So it's best to teach these simple things first, and then to add these really good habits later on. The next point I want to address is how much behind the scenes does a junior developer learning a new rule in CSS or a new piece of technology in the browser, or even, I have a low-level background. I started in C, C++, all of those languages, assembly. But how much does a developer in the high-level environment like CSS actually need to know what's going on behind the scenes, right? So the answer to that is, and I'm going to make just a statement here, and you guys are free to disagree with me, obviously, but I'm going to say that they don't actually need to know the technical implementations of Flexbox beyond the obvious behavioral traits of Flexbox, or in fact any other CSS that they're working with. Performance is not something that a junior developer really has to worry about. And obviously the smaller the organization, the more relevant that kind of stuff is. But for the most part, that is my job. It is my job to understand what is under the hood of Flexbox, and maybe any performance tweaks that we can make to Flexbox will come across my desk. So you really don't need to be going and berating your junior developers, saying that, oh, we shouldn't use this prefix in Flexbox because it has a 30% reduction in the GPU rendering pipeline for the browser, right? Now, obviously, there's not much you can really do about it besides not use it. It's up to the browser vendors to actually deal with that kind of thing. Unless you want to be a browser vendor contributor in your business, which is totally awesome by me. But it's just not something that's a relevant thing, and again, it's just going to add confusion, right? Because the junior developer, in my mind, their job is basically to put the big legwork together, to get the designs together, to get all the concepts together, to get everything together, right? And then they push it to you. They push it across your desk, and they start on the next project, and then you use your fine 10 years of experience to basically hammer out and finesse the website. So you, as a senior engineer, your job is twofold, really, right? Your job is to be a really good mentor and a really good teacher, and your job is also to hammer out the last 10% of every project. So, I guess that's mainly the points that I wanted to address. I understand that I really tickled some professional developers the wrong way here, but know that that wasn't at all my intention. It's just that from my experience, if you try and do what you guys are discussing trying to do, which is, basically be perfect on the first run, you're going to end up with actually worse developers, and you're going to end up with a situation where, and you guys, if you haven't watched my university rants, then you probably shouldn't, or should, I don't know, but you're going to end up with the same rubbish that we get from universities year in and year out, and you're going to have to remold your developers anyway. So it's best to just start with the foundations, and start with good foundations, start with modern foundations. Universities are still teaching tables and stuff in my country. Start with those basic foundations, right? Because they may not have any idea how far ahead the web is from what they actually did at university. So start easy, start clean, teach the basic concepts, and then incorporate those into your tooling. After all, SAS, LESS, all of those things, SCSS, are no more than just, build environments, and they're just tools to help you work with the core foundation technologies of the browser, CSS and all those kinds of things. And to sum up my point, don't teach something that you're not currently teaching. If you're teaching a CSS rule, if you're teaching something in CSS, a concept in CSS, don't go worrying about the DOM, right? Get the basic minimum amount to work. And if you need to, if you feel really, really, really compelled, although I'd recommend not, make a little side note for that developer. Tell them that that is probably not the best way to do things, but you'll come back to that at a later stage. But you don't recommend putting what you've just done into production on the side which you haven't been teaching. Anyway, that's all I've got. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope that clears up some points. I look forward to having a debate in the comment section with you all. I know some of you will disagree, and that's totally fine. I have personal disagreements all the time, and I guess that's what makes this such a fun industry for us to all be in. So, yeah, chuck your comments down there. Dislike, like, it all is all good, and I hope to see you guys soon. So, thanks.